Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine presented by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas. Joining us a little while is the president of the Virginia Civil Defense League, Philip van Cleave. We're going to talk about all of the hysteria running around the Commonwealth of Virginia and the United States after the horrors and the mass murder in Las Vegas. But right now we kick off with another story that hits very close to home and has brought the spotlight nationally upon Virginia, especially the university thereof. Casey Johnson is the author of The Campus Rape Frenzy, and he is on with us. Casey, thanks very much for joining us. How are you doing, sir?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
So take us in, as far as I understand now, this is not the first time people have felt like the Trump administration may have turned tail, but there has been some controversy over the Department of Education and its handling of how we're going to go forward in Title IX and within there. But Betsy DeVos has said that they are going to restore due process to the campuses and to Title IX. But wasn't that what Title IX was supposed to guarantee in the first place?
Indeed it was. Title IX is a 1970s law that banned sex discrimination in schools that receive federal funds. But in 2011, the Obama administration issued guidance that basically told schools when they were handling sexual assault allegations to put a thumb on the scale and, for all practical purposes, to presume the accused student guilty and then to design procedures that made it very hard for the accused student to prove his guilt. For instance, most of these sexual assault tribunals on campus don't allow the accused student to cross-examine his accuser or to have a lawyer cross-examine his accuser, which we think of as a fundamental American right if you're pursuing the truth. And then this was occurring in the middle of campus atmospheres where there was a kind of frenzied intellectual environment. I mean, the UVA case with Rolling Stone and Jackie was a perfect example of that. This was a transparently fraudulent claim, and yet the president of the University of Virginia, most senior administrators at UVA, most of the faculty at UVA who spoke out on this, treated this as if it were a true allegation.
Oh, yeah.
You had pressure from the federal government from above and this pressure from campuses from below to find these guys guilty, and it created a kind of witch hunt atmosphere.
Witch hunt, I think, is an appropriate phrase for it because certainly nobody wants to be seen as on the side of some sexual predator. And unfortunately, that is a tactic that the left has been using since Saul Alinsky first wrote his first essay on the subject, is to come up with such black and white ridiculopathies surrounding an issue as to force everyone to agree with you, because to not agree with you would be to take the side of something so horrific. But that's not the case of what's going on here, and justice is not being served by this. Correct, Casey?
Correct. I mean, one of the things that we often forget is this happens in periods of moral panic, is that the principles of due process, making sure that the accused has a right to a lawyer, a right to access to all exculpatory evidence, a right to cross-examination, a right to an impartial tribunal, those exist not merely to protect the accused, although they're important for those purposes. Those exist because hundreds of years of legal tradition in the UK and then eventually in the US show us that that's the best way to get at the truth. Mm-hmm. And so what colleges have done is set up systems that even when they work well, and very often they don't, you can't get at the truth. They're fundamentally unfair systems.
Well, in the double danger of this is you're going to talk about a young person who's now going to go forth from their life scarred or carrying, again, to torture the metaphor a little bit further, a scarlet letter forward that has them marked as a rapist from something that might not even have been patently, obviously true on a campus just because the Title IX proceedings didn't give them a chance to bring up the due process out of some zeal for protecting the sanctity of or the image or the social structure of the university.
That's right. I mean, the scarlet letter metaphor is actually a pretty good one, which is that you project forward the effect of these allegations. It's true, as defenders of the Obama policy point out, that the accused party in a campus tribunal can't go to jail. But that mark now is on his record for the rest of his life. So it's unlikely he's going to be able to get into another school. Any job that he applies for that requires a background check, that's going to be revealed. What business in their right mind is going to hire someone who's branded a rapist? And without an attempt to explain. So I'll give another example, a case also at Virginia at James Madison. The key evidence in a case at James Madison, the accuser claimed that she was intoxicated, was a voicemail that she had presented to the appeals board that showed her badly slurring her words, and she identified the date that it came from. She said it came from the night of the incident. It turned out that the voicemail came from the previous night. It had nothing to do with the incident at all, but because James Madison's rules didn't allow the accused student to have access to the evidence that was presented to the appeals board, he had no way of defending himself, and the only way he was able to ultimately get exoneration was to pay tens or possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars in a legal fight that lasted 3 years and get a federal court judgment. So Secretary DeVos said in her September speech, I think she was right on target here, a system that requires an accused student to go to court in a lengthy lawsuit to obtain due process is a system that's really quite broken.
What was the intent? Take us back a little bit, Casey, and we're visiting with the co-author of The Campus Rape Frenzy, Casey Johnson. Take us back into the original intent, because Title IX, and I think most of us have only come across the phrase Title IX, if at all, in discussing collegiate athletics. But and this was a part of Title IX that was in there, even though the pop culture really only heard of it as, well, you have to have this many scholarships for women for athletics as you do for men, and it seemed like that was all it was. And now you find out there were all these other codicils that went into Title IX that really crippled the administration, and often, as we learned in the case of Jackie and the University of Virginia, forced a university to be a law enforcement agency when they were ill-equipped to do so and incapable of reaching out to real police investigators who might be able to or who have been trained specifically to handle sexual assault. Right.
I mean, there is nothing in Title IX, which is a very brief law, passed in 1972, that says that campuses should function as quasi-law enforcement agencies. And for 25 years, Title IX was not interpreted as giving campuses that authority. In 97, the Clinton administration, or bureaucrats within the Clinton administration, first reinterpret Title IX to give just to say that sexual assault allegations have to be adjudicated, but they don't order schools to use specific procedures. And this is really a very recent change. It was 2011 in the Obama administration with this thing called the Dear Colleague letter. And what the Obama administration tells schools is that unless you follow the procedures that they laid out, we'll pull federal funds. And no school today can survive that, because any federal funds are federal financial assistance to students or research funds to professors. So basically, they had a gun to the head of the schools. But you have this weird situation where a law that's been on the books for 39 years is suddenly reinterpreted by bureaucrats within the Department of Education to give it authority that if we could go back to 1972 and ask the sponsors of the law, did you ever intend it in this way, it's clear that they would have answered no.
Well, and you speak to something that we've talked about in the academic world and the research, the scientific field on this program frequently, this soft-core bribery that the government goes into and gets into using taxpayer monies, managing their finances without any indication of any concern about the indebtedness of the government. They just send more money to agencies as a bribe to say, do it this way, we want it done, or we're going to take away all the money you've now gotten used to for the last 10 years. Certainly the first case I can recall of that being used was Jimmy Carter in the 70 or the 55 mile an hour speed limit in the Federal Department of Highways, saying, change your speed limits or you're going to lose all your federal money. But they seem to have grown drunk on this idea of, we'll give you federal money and then do it our way, once we've decided what that way is.
Right. This is a precedent which is long-standing. And I think there's one small difference between what we saw in the Title IX thing and other instances. The speed limit example is a good one. So if you go back to the speed limit example, in the late 70s, there were a significant number of states who didn't want to do this, but ultimately concluded, probably correctly, that they were so reliant on the federal funds that they had to go along with the dictate. In this case, one of the striking things is that most colleges, in fact, have not resisted, or did not resist the Obama policy. And when DeVos, last month, issued new guidance basically telling colleges that they could create fairer systems if they wanted, that the Education Department was going to remove its thumb on the scale. The result has been utter defiance. Title IX administrator after Title IX administrator saying, we're not going to change our policies. We're very happy with what we have. So in some ways, what you saw in this circumstance were administrators and faculty members on campus using the federal threat as an excuse to ram through policies that they already wanted to see, and that already, very shamefully, I think, had significant support on campus.
Is there also a part of what you're describing to us, Casey, is similar to why you never see redundant agencies regarding the environment, per se, rolled back, even if they're completely and 100% redundant, because no politician wants to be seen as or to be called out for, quote, harming the ecology. But in this case, what college president wants to be seen as abandoning women or allowing, for sexual predators, or dropping Title IX, because the pop culture is promoted this idea that Title IX is some shield that's going to protect the co-eds on campus from these predatory males, and is actually, quite honestly, wound up doing quite the opposite in many cases.
It's quite so. I mean, that any president who created a fairer system now would be risking losing his or her job.
Oh, yeah.
A good example of this is Janet Napolitano, Obama's former Homeland Security Secretary, who is now the president of the entire University of California system, which is an enormous system. And Napolitano, in 2015, published an article in an academic journal published by Yale, which was actually a pretty good article. It pointed out the serious deficiencies in the Obama Title IX approach and said that these are matters that really are better handled by law enforcement. It was sensible. In the last week, Napolitano has twice issued statements denouncing Betsy DeVos for abandoning women on campus and saying that California system is going to stand up and maintain all of these policies. So here you have someone who, in her own words, has admitted these policies are deeply unfair, but she understands if she actually now says that publicly in a political forum, she's likely to be out of a job. And it is a good illustration of the cowardice that we too often see from academic administrators. Well,
the cowardice that in many cases isn't even intellectually honest, and it isn't even taking the content of the advice and the instructions, and it's really just attaching it to Betsy DeVos's boss, President Trump.
Right, and I think the irony here is that from all indications, this was really a move that came from the Education Department. It didn't come from the White House at all. And DeVos, in a lot of ways, DeVos deserves an incredible amount of credit for having the courage to take it on, because as you point out, there is no political benefit from the position that she has taken here. It's easy for demagogues to say, that means Betsy DeVos is defending rapists. And what I think she's recognized is that this is a system which is so unfair and was championed in part by her predecessors that the only just course would be to reverse. And my sense in politics today is that we don't see people standing up for moral principles if it doesn't serve their political interests very often. And yet here you have a good example of someone who has done this, who looked at the evidence, spent several months trying to figure out how the Education Department has handled this previously, and just decided this is wrong. And I'm going to stand up and do something about it, even if it means I'll get political criticism.
We're visiting with Casey Johnson, who, along with Stuart Taylor, penned The Campus Rape Frenzy. It's in bookstores, and you can pick it up there. Let me ask you, because you note a couple of notably conservative institutes of higher education, that they being Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania, as places where legal minds I was saying this facetiously,
Yes.
that even the legal minds there agree with what's being said, but I worry that if you were to press these same law scholars now, they might say, oh, well, not if Trump's doing it, or at least that would be what I would hear them saying.
The irony here is that there were two public letters, one by 28 professors at Harvard Law School, one by 16 professors at Penn Law School, criticizing the Obama administration for basic denials of due process. And in the last month, several of the highest profile of these faculty members, including 4 feminist law professors at Harvard Law, have issued cautious but nonetheless generally supportive statements of what DeVos is trying to do. I mean, they've expressed concerns about Trump, which is more or less what you've expected. But they've argued that DeVos's efforts deserve support, and that people of good faith should give her a chance to succeed. And so, in a debate where we've seen too often, I think people sort of fall to the partisan winds, these law professors who are working in very liberal environments and who've got a lot of criticism for speaking up even during the Obama administration, have largely stayed true to what they've said. 4 law professors in particular at Harvard Law issued a white paper in late August sent to DeVos in which they urged her to make a series of changes, and a lot of those ideas from that white paper appeared in the interim guidance that the Department of Education issued a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, don't stand too close to Trump, but if you can get, but their letters seem to be about due process, which if you're a jurist, that should be the end game. It doesn't matter. The founding of this nation was based on the idea of it doesn't matter who the president is. Due process and justice is, number one, blind, but also constant and immutable.
Right, and this is what we hope. But of course, we all know the story of American history, and we've seen this, on causes both on the left and right. Is that people in the abstract say that they favor due process, but when you're dealing with highly emotional claims, the assumption is, well, the end has to justify the means, and the end here is to get these rapists off campus. But of course, the problem is that you need a system to determine whether someone who is accused is in fact guilty of what he is accused. You can't simply begin the process by presuming that the guy is guilty, and that's the system that too often exists today.
Is there a problem in our society these days because of the overly populist nature of the elected officials, especially, but those who they appoint to administer these things, to conflate preferential treatment to justice, and that justice by its nature is slow, clunky, difficult to capture in 140 characters or even in a 5-minute segment on National Public Radio as it's happening. Watching justice as it goes is about as aesthetically pleasing as watching a building get built. You don't get the full scope of it until it's done. But we in our society, we don't want that anymore. It seems like we want immediate gratification, and that's not where justice lives, Casey.
Well, Kirsten Gillibrand, the New York senator who has been probably the political world's number one demagogue on this issue, has in fact made this argument explicitly several times, that justice simply takes too long, and we need a system for removing these rapists from campus immediately. But of course, the problem is that one of the reasons justice takes too long is that we need to make sure that it's fair and that the accused party has an opportunity to respond and to defend himself. And if he's guilty, and then punish. But oftentimes, he's not. So there is a degree of impatience here, and I think there's also been a willingness to use an understandable impatience by the public, by demagogues like Gillibrand, to really advance forward with their agenda.
Well, and that's the sad thing is that you're watching politicians who, when somebody is sent to prison or having had their lives ruined for this, will turn around and say, "Oh, it's not my fault; it's the courts." It's almost what, and I've was reminded back in high school, I read some of the works on violence by Hannah Arendt, who talks about the fully developed bureaucracy becoming a tyranny without a tyrant. We have this ability now where it's nobody's fault anymore. Gillibrand can say, "Oh, we're very sorry, your life was ruined. It's not my fault. It was the system's fault." And the system will turn around and say, "Yeah, but Gillibrand told us to do it." And nobody ever takes responsibility for this stuff anymore, Casey.
Precisely, and on top of that, these tribunals, unlike court cases, these tribunals are always secret. Federal privacy law says that student disciplinary action is not open to the public realm. So, we hear the phrase star chamber sometimes tossed around too frequently, but this is a kind of star chamber. So once you're accused, you're going into a system that has no clear regulations, where bureaucrats blame other people for deprivations of due process, and where the outcome is a secret outcome, the procedures are secret, and the inner workings are secret. And the great saying of Justice Brandeis is that sunlight is the best of disinfectants. But this is a system that is structured to operate in the darkness solely, and so abuses in that kind of system are very, very easy to occur.
Well, and we've seen this in our criminal justice system as well, Casey, where people are hit with 15 charges and told, listen, just plead to this one, we'll drop the other 14. And innocent people, it comes out later, went to jail just because they were told, listen, nobody's going to beat 15 charges in court, so just take the plea deal. I fear that in these dark rooms, that's going to happen even more frequently, especially with the university looking to avoid public black eyes.
Right. The thing here is that universities are not neutral arbiters in this process.
Right. Yeah.
If a university comes back with too many not guilty findings, they run the risk of coming under investigation by the federal government, at least during the Obama years, at great expense and at great time to their approach. So the natural approach of bureaucrats in these circumstances is, if it's close, we need a guilty finding because that's the easier way out. So it's a very, very serious problem. I mean, when we think of justice, a baseline principle of justice is that the arbiter, whether it's a judge or a jury, is impartial, is not biased. But these are systems that are biased at the core, because the worst of these systems that you see oftentimes at colleges is called a single investigator model, where a person who is hired by the Title IX officer, so this person is dependent financially on the goodwill of the Title IX officer, this person investigates the case, this person decides the case, and this person metes out punishment.
Unbelievable.
It would be as if you had a police officer, a prosecutor, a jury, and a judge, all as the same person. That's an obviously unfair system.
Isn't that what they had these protests in Ferguson and Baltimore saying the police were acting arbitrarily? It's amazing to me to watch the hypocritical, I don't even hypocritical, but the disparate applications of what seem to be the same issues societally. I have to ask you this because as somebody who chronicles this on radio for 6 days a week, I feel like I'm riding a mechanical bull and I don't know when the bell is going to ring because it's here, we're there. It is almost as if we're living in a case study of Cloward and Piven, and the society is being overwhelmed from First Amendment rights and Second Amendment and Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights. Tell me that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, Casey, in this.
One would hope so, but I don't see a whole lot. I mean, there are two possibilities for a more optimistic outcome. The first is that DeVos has said that the Education Department is going to issue new regulations. That is, that they're going to follow the law, solicit feedback from the public, and then issue binding regulations. And it's possible, if those regulations are strong enough, that because in the end colleges do care about the bottom line, that they create a fairer procedure. And then the second thing is that accused students, once they're accused in this system, their best chance of justice often is going to court. There have been 68 times so far since the Dear Colleague letter, so that's only in the last 6 years, where an accused student has gone to court, sued his university, and won, which is very difficult to do in campus disciplinary cases, including a couple of cases at appellate courts in the Second Circuit in New York, Sixth Circuit in Cincinnati. And it's possible that the weight of this law will increase and colleges will start getting very significant financial judgments for their railroading of these students. And so that's my sense, is that only when it becomes financially problematic for these schools to dispense a kind of kangaroo justice, that's when they'll stop, but not 1 second before.
Well, I appreciate it, Casey. Thank you so much for taking some time out with us. We're going to continue this as we get with Hannah Sherlocker of the program Campus Reform next week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. But thank you for taking us inside your work, and hopefully we get to a point where I can't see them giving up, but at some point, reality has to set back in, because I don't like the other choices that we face in this. Casey Johnson, co-author of Campus Rape Frenzy, thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you very much for having me.
Philip Van Cleave from the Virginia Civil Defense League next on the Second Amendment, now also under assault after the mass murders in Las Vegas on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. And I'll tell you, public policy these days, as we were saying to Casey Johnson, it feels like we're riding some sort of out-of-control mechanical bull, and the bell just never rings. It's the First Amendment, it's the Second Amendment, it's the Fourth and Fifth Amendment, and heck, I think the Ninth and Tenth Amendments are under assault as well. And one of them is the Second Amendment. And never has it been more vociferous nor more tenuous, due to the fact that many of its most staunch defenders are now blanching at the thought of it. Philip Van Cleave is one of our dear friends and the president of the Virginia Citizens Defense League. Philip, welcome back to the program. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing excellent, Joe. Thank you for having me on. I always look forward to it.
Well, thank you. Those in my profession are prone to hyperbole, but am I overstating the precarious nature of our Second Amendment protections, given the fact that now even Republicans are saying, well, yeah, maybe we should talk about it? And what do we need to do to shore them up, or do we just have to replace them with better advocates?
Well, it's a pitiful situation. You know, there are two bills sitting out there that would enhance, or let's just say put our rights for guns back where they should be based on the Second Amendment, the things that have been stolen from us over the years. And one of those is the ability to carry in all 50 states if you have a concealed handgun permit. It just simply says that all states that have such permits will simply honor the permit from another person from another state as they would their own. Mm-hmm. It's not complicated, but oh no, we're just dragging and crawling, and the Democrats are saying, no, we can't support that. They go very partisan. Then we have a shooting, and all of a sudden, oh no, now we expect the Republicans to be bipartisan when the Democrats were not, and the Republicans go along with it. Now we can move something along quickly. When it's something that benefits the most law-abiding of the law-abiding, well, we got to drag our heels on that. So it's very frustrating. It's politics at its worst, and VCDL is not backing down on this. As far as like these bump fire stocks, they should not be touched. They should be allowed. Nothing should be changed. The other side says, well, do you need such a thing? Well, being a free American is not about needs, it's about wants. Mm-hmm. We don't need an automobile, but we want an automobile, and we have them. We don't need air conditioning, but we want it, and we have it. This is the same thing, and it's only when it's guns that we suddenly decide to talk about changes and restrictions. An automobile plows through a crowd of people in Charlottesville, wounds 19 severely and kills one. Not a word said about automobiles.
No.
Not even a consideration. But had that been a person with a gun that did exactly the same damage, exactly the same, oh boy, the conversation's about that.
Absolutely.
It's not about the death.
Oh no, it's about violence first and foremost, and how do we help our children grow up not indulging their violent tendencies. I get that, Philip. But as a matter of law, I mean, now I'm hearing them bandy about the idea of national reciprocity as a bargaining chip for restrictions on bump stocks, and I'm thinking, hold on, that seems like way too much for the left to give to only get the restriction on one accessory to a firearm. There's more going on here, and then as I poke around, and I've talked to other folks like, oh no, this would leave open a lot of other things things to start to get restricted. Plus, the national reciprocity got tweaked a little bit, from what I understand. The language in it, sort of changed to where the national reciprocity would only recognize the most stringent of the concealed carry laws. So, if you had a concealed carry law in Virginia, you would have to, if you wanted to use it in New York, you would have to comply with their standards for concealed carry. So ostensibly making everybody's concealed carry laws, whether it's New York or California, wherever they're the most stringent by the left's determination. Are those things that we need to be concerned about, considering the left's zeal to play let's make a deal with this?
Yeah, we are. We do have to be concerned about that. The H.R. 38, which allows national reciprocity as written, did not have any of that in, and I've not heard about any tweaks to it yet. Now, they may be wanting to do that, and we need to watch that intensely for any changes. And if their goal would be to put a poison pill in there, where if it does go through, then they've got all these horrendous requirements that very few people would be able to follow. Or they would, the poison pill would work the other way, and the Republicans and the gun owners would simply walk away and say, no, we're not doing this deal.
Right.
And either way, they win.
Right.
The Republicans have the power here. It's up to them to cave in when they're in the driver's seat. Why would they let the passenger drive the car? I mean, it makes no sense. They have the power. They were elected to do things.
But then
Democrats are in a passenger seat.
Philip, you've been doing this a long time, and you've dealt with a lot of the strange, odd, humanoid creatures known as elected officials. What is it about something as patently fraudulent as the statement of Nancy Pelosi saying, well, we need background checks, when this guy had gone through, and you know damn well either Nancy is a complete disconnected nitwit, which I don't think she is, or she's just using boilerplate nonsense, because the guy had passed 3 federal FBI background checks before he ever got into the Mandalay Bay.
Yeah, well, she's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but needless to say, even people that are sharper than she is say the same thing. It's a talking point. They really don't understand guns. They just know they hate them, and that's a talking point. Yeah, they throw out stuff that has. I've seen them call for a gun ban when somebody was stabbed to death.
I guess what difference does it make? What about Terry McAuliffe jumping in, not to surprise anyone, saying he's going to act on new gun restrictions, and even though he'll be out of office long before the next General Assembly sits down, apparently going to unilaterally go after stricter gun regulations in Virginia. What have you heard in the latest from Governor Terry's office?
Well, the point is on him. He's a political animal. That's it. He's politically. It was all done for politics. This wasn't done to make anybody safer. This was politics. He wants the Republicans to have to battle gun control during the election. That would make that an issue front and center for them to have to address. It was all politics. That's all he's about, not safety or anything like that. When you understand that about him, you just shrug because, of course, common sense, logic, reason. His timing, rushing it in right now in October before the elections was not an accident. He saw an opportunity and simply took it.
Having certainly no longer the theory that the left would come up with, false premise and false narrative. Philip, you and the rest of the members of the VCDL that were so impugned by Katie Couric's faux documentary that has been proven, yet she still gets to come and speak at UVA's 200th anniversary celebration as an honored guest and a scion of the journalistic community, which I can't imagine. But then again, Bill Clinton got to stay president after sexually assaulting his intern, and Ted Kennedy got to stay in office after killing a girl at the bottom of the Chappaquiddick River. But I guess consistency isn't what I'm looking for, but one of the things that concerns me in the way this went down in Las Vegas is that here's an instance where certainly one of the Second Amendment defense groups regular points is, somebody with a gun, like in the Bataclan, is able to stop these kind of violence. So we've immediately removed the talking point of, oh, well, somebody else with a gun could have stopped him because he was up on the roof. Secondly, it was a crowd full of country western fans and a bunch of country western singers who have been ardently supportive of conservative causes. Was this, or could this, or am I just insane to think that this is way too conveniently designed to take some of the mortar out from in between the Second Amendment wall?
Well, I've pondered these things too, and it's not the first time that right before major legislation was going to be considered, including like the repeal of the assault weapon ban years and years ago, that something happens just right at that instant, just some kind of a shooting. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of look at that and you just kind of shake your head and go, wow, wasn't that a coincidence? Now, was it? Well, I don't know. But it certainly raises questions. And, I'll tell you what, for the people that were in that arena, I guarantee, and a lot of them said this, they were wishing they had a gun. They didn't know where these shots were coming from. And even if they knew that there was a sniper on the building shooting at them, they didn't know the extent of it. How did they know this wasn't ISIS? How did they know when they ran out those gates they weren't going to run into a bunch of people there trying to shoot them or blow them up?
Sure.
Or stab them? They didn't know that. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know where it was going to end. So, again, disarming all those people would serve no purpose. Those that would have been armed would have been the ones that at least felt somewhat secure.
Right.
At least they had some control over whatever might be greeting them on the other side of the gates outside that arena.
Let's not forget, and I just felt like all of a sudden I need to, and maybe this is just the populist in me, but remind folks that we are still praying for the healing for the families of those who lost loved ones in a senseless act of violence, and that what we're engaging in here is trying to bring intellect back to the conversation. And I don't mean to make it seem like we're uncaring to the families who may have lost loved ones or have lost loved ones in any sort of way. We just had the story that the 500th gun death was just recorded in the city of Chicago this year, Philip. And these are all criminal acts done by criminals, and an often case of the same ethnic background as their victims. Yet none of these stories make it to the news, it seems.
Well, every month after month after month, as many people are murdered in Chicago as were murdered in Las Vegas. But you don't hear that, so Chicago has 12 times the number of people were killed in that event in Vegas. But nobody wants to talk about it because it's in gun control heaven. This totally shoots down the narrative that the other side has. Now, they try to say, if only those people in Indiana didn't have those loose gun laws that would allow guns to be smuggled into Illinois from Indiana. Which I say, well, wait a minute, how come Indiana doesn't have the gun problem that Illinois has? Why doesn't Wisconsin have the problem that Illinois has? Why doesn't Iowa? Why not? Why doesn't Virginia have the gun problem that D.C. has? If it's our lax gun laws to get guns into D.C., you have to laugh at them. They try, and they make something that sounds reasonable if you don't think about it. As long as you don't take it more than skin value and don't look below that, you can be suckered in.
The NRA was founded to help the freed black slaves defend themselves and to learn how to use guns that they had been prohibited from having for all the time they had been held, as slaves. And the history of teaching those who are disenfranchised to defend themselves, I find it interesting. And we've had this discussion on this program in the past regarding the meaning of the Second Amendment. And I found several, instances where the meaning has been, and I've mentioned this to some jurists who think it has some merit, that the phraseology in the Second Amendment, in order to regulate the militia, the right of the citizens to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, is how I interpret it. It's not to allow for the government to create a regulated militia. It's so that the citizens can keep the militia in its place and that we aren't overrun by the militia. Is that a fair thing? And if that's the case, shouldn't these black communities communities that are up in arms about police brutality be saying, hold it, we need to get the NRA or the VCDL in here to help teach us how to defend ourselves and our property against a militia that's gone out of control?
Well, the Second Amendment, the militia there, my understanding from studying this for quite a bit and reading a lot on this, the militia was originally everybody. We were all the militia. There was originally an army, and people would band together and protect their communities, and but there were no police forces and stuff. And militias still have a place in an emergency. Virginia has a state militia from the state. It's an unarmed militia currently. That could change, I guess. But the idea, the militia being used in there the term was being used more as one of the examples of why the Second Amendment was important, that we, the people, need to be able to act as a militia. And the regulated part meant that we should be trained. We should make sure that we're trained. We know how to use our firearms, know how to act as a militia in an emergency. But it also covered self-defense and defense from a tyrannical government. So you have to understand the Second Amendment. You also have to understand what the Founding Fathers wrote while they were debating, while they were talking about the purpose of the Second Amendment, because they all spelled it out. And it was clearly about defense of the state, defense from the state, and self-defense all together. But they listed the one that the government would be most likely to try to restrict your rights by saying, "Oh, we're the government. We can't have you rise up against us, so we're going to control guns." That's why it started out with saying well-regulated militia. That militia being actually non-government militia of the people, which technically all of us are a part of. But in practice, only very few groups are doing anything like that.
Well, that's why I feel like these black communities that feel like they're being persecuted, well, they should learn how to defend themselves and perhaps stop the crime on their own streets. Well,
certainly the thing that amazes me about the black community is how few of them are involved in Second Amendment rights. Those that are intensely involved. They really get it. But so many of them are just, and part of that's the history of the things that have happened to them. Keep in mind that originally, once the slaves were freed in the South, especially if a young black man's walking around with a gun on his hip, he was going to come under intense scrutiny by the police and others. And then they didn't want them concealing the gun because then they wouldn't know. And so they passed the Jim Crow type laws where you had to have a permit, and it was up to a judge. That's all Jim Crow stuff.
Yeah, and
that's all meant to control minorities.
Yeah, and we still live under those.
Yes, we do.
And that's one of the most insidious. So what's coming up with the? We're certainly getting into hunting season, but what is the VCDL up to before we're finished up here, Philip? So that folks who may have just heard of the VCDL, and it amazes me that every day more people hear about it. They're like, that's cool. I'd like to join that. What do you got going on in the next few weeks?
Okay. We have annual. Monthly meetings going on. A monthly meeting in Northern Virginia. We're getting ready for the legislative season. Keep in mind it's October now.
Yeah.
Elections coming up next month. We're also reminding our members to vote in November. We really, really, really need gun owners to turn out and vote. We absolutely do. We have seen elections where the other side that we oppose squeaks in by just a few thousand votes, or in some cases less than 1,000.
Oh, yeah. Look at Mark Herring.
We need gun owners to vote.
Yeah, look at Mark Herring, for example.
Mark Herring. No excuses. Get out and vote. We're also preparing for the legislative season. We've got a lot of gun bills that we want to see put in to put our rights back where they should be. For example, take away the power of the state to have state agency gun bans. We don't want that. If they want a gun ban, they go to the General Assembly and request one, but they can't do it on their own. We got a bill for that. We want you to be able to carry without needing a permit in Virginia. Concealed carry.
Yeah,
right now you can open carry, but you can't conceal carry unless you got a permit. So what we say is a concealed carry permit is really permission to wear a coat because it's the same person, same gun, same everything, except if you put on a coat, now you need training, now you need this, now you need that.
Right.
And that's kind of crazy. So we're going to be pushing to get that fixed as well.
It's important to point out that we've just had 4 years of the tie-breaking vote being on the other side of gun issues and the VCDL in Ralph Northam as lieutenant governor. And, again, we're probably going to have a fairly, well, the Senate isn't up for election, so the Senate's construct is going to remain the same. So who is that lieutenant governor and what is their feeling on the Second Amendment? And I think you need to look at Mr. Fairfax and Ms. Vogel and say, okay, well, which one do I believe in for that? Plus, getting involved in the General Assembly races, House of Delegates, very important to have those votes, and perhaps even a veto-proof vote, even though one would hope that you wouldn't need to veto too much of the stuff, right, Philip?
Yeah, but I would definitely go for you've got to vote in all these House races. Because if indeed, who knows, it could end up being that we do need a veto override. But, it's so important, and there's so much we can do. This is the time, a lot of gun owners are saying, oh, well, Trump's in office, we can relax, we really don't need a lot of stuff. He's not going to let bad things go through. You know what, this is just the opposite. Now is the time, especially to be involved, because now we have an opportunity to actually move the ball forward a long way.
Right.
If we blow this opportunity, then we're going to be fighting just trying to stay where we are or possibly take a step back. No, we need to run with the ball now that we got it and not stand still and sit on our rear ends thinking that somebody else will take care of it. No, you guys need to get out. You need to vote. You need to be active in this. And we can do miracles if the cards land right.
VCDL.org. Philip, thank you so much for your time this week.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
The Philip van Cleave, president of the Virginia Citizens Defense League. Thank you for listening. For all of us here, tertiumquids.org is where you find us. So long, and thanks for all the fish.